This is Jim Hughes with AFIO Now. We are a program of recorded interviews with members of the U.S. intelligence community or those who write about them. Today, I have an amazing guest who has a fascinating story to tell. Her name is Margaret Coker. Margaret is an investigative journalist. Over the last about 20 years, she has covered stories in 30 plus countries, working primarily for the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. She may even qualify to be an honorary member of our community because shortly after the 9/11 attacks, she was able to talk her way onto a rickety old Soviet helicopter and fly into northern Afghanistan to cover the U.S. liberation of Afghanistan. Most relevant for today's interview, in 2017 and 18, she was the New York Times bureau chief in Baghdad. Margaret, welcome to AFIO Now.
Pleased to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Margaret, you have a brand new book out. I've read it and thoroughly enjoyed it. As I told you off camera, I was very impressed by particularly the social and cultural aspects of the book. It's called The Spymaster of Baghdad. What's it about?
Yeah, so in my elevator pitch to get my book contract, I basically told people, look, this is a story about some incredible acts of bravery and wartime espionage. And that's probably, if we get it adapted for a movie, that's probably all that Netflix will care about. But really what I cared about and what I wanted to write about are some of our allies that have been fighting with us during this forever war, the war on terror, whatever you and your group of colleagues call it now. Because there are, as you know, people who suit up every day in defense of their own nation, but also on behalf of the same sort of mission, which is identifying threats, extremist threats, violent extremist threats, and trying to mitigate those threats. And so the Spymaster of Baghdad is about this spymaster, an Iraqi bureaucrat who has cultivated a very elite team of counterterrorism agents and officers, and their ability to put those officers deep undercover and help to infiltrate the Islamic State and to make Baghdad in Iraq safer because of that.
Margaret, what's the historic background? What was going on in Baghdad in Iraq at that time that led to these events?
Yeah, so for all of your members and viewers, I have been going in and out of Iraq since 2003, just at the start of the U.S. operation to oust Saddam Hussein. I came to the Middle East very accidentally. I'm actually a Russian speaker by trade, which is why I could talk my way onto a rickety Soviet helicopter back in 2001. But I moved to the Middle East because, as a ambitious journalist, that's where the news was, and so there I was landing in Iraq with a lot of background about authoritarianism and one-party states and liberation movements, quite frankly. So I've been in and out of Baghdad and all across Iraq, going through lots of different iterations of violence, extreme violence, living through the times when Baghdad was basically the murder capital of the world because of the way in which violence was being weaponized, both for political ends within Iraq and also in the war that Al-Qaeda and other violent extremists were using Iraq as an experiment for. So I go back in 2016, 2017 for the New York Times as the bureau chief. I'd lived through a lot of bloody days. And when I landed for this new assignment, what I realized first off, because of course, journalists like me never live in the green zone, we live outside in the wild. And Baghdad was undergoing a renaissance in 2017. It was the first time in all of my deployments and all of my assignments in and out that I really felt safe in the capital city. And other Iraqis did as well. Families were out enjoying evenings at the leisure parks, eating ice cream. Small business owners were also investing back in their businesses, which meant that they thought that they were safe. When you put money into a business, you don't think that your windows are going to get blown out by a terror attack. It felt like there was a whole sea change going on in this great ancient capital. And I wanted to know who had cracked the nut. Of course, the American military did great things in Iraq. They also did terrible things in Iraq. One thing they never failed to do, what they never succeeded in doing, is making Baghdad safe for regular citizens. But someone had. And so I just took that really, really easy question, or straightforward question, I should say, because it wasn't easy to get the answer, as to who solved that riddle and made Baghdad safe. So using my years of collected security sources within the Iraqi establishment, also within the Western and U.S. Security establishment, I tried to get that question answered. And for months, I was asking the question without an answer. Nobody actually knew. And finally, I hit upon an Iraqi general who knew. And he seems to be one of about half a dozen people who were read in on this amazing undercover operation that had been underway. And he told me that I needed to go talk to the person who I identify in my book as the Spymaster of Baghdad. Of course, there are multiple layers of intelligence agencies in Iraq, but Abu Ali al-Basri had figured out how to make the capital safe because he had created a legend and inserted one of his officers behind enemy lines who was living within a very important Islamic State cell that had been responsible for trying to bomb Iraq through the time of the ground war that was going on in northern Iraq at the time, the ground war against the Islamic State.
One of the things that I complimented you on during our off-camera conversations was how well you describe the difficulties going on in Baghdad at the time, particularly between the Sunni and Shia populations. Tell our viewers just a little bit about Sadr City and what it was like to live there.
Yeah, so first off, let me just say that I am a child of military officers. The military is our family profession, if we can say that. All of my uncles on both sides of the family, my brother-in-laws, everyone has served. And so I grew up in this atmosphere of watching movies about World War II and going to visit famous battlefields. You know, I had an appreciation for the kinds of people who had been partisans working on behalf of the Allies, if you will, during the Great Wars. And as a reporter since 2001, and even before that, I felt like it was my public service and my public duty to try and explain other cultures to the Americans that I grew up with, people who cared about our country, but also had an appreciation for what we were doing abroad. And so my time in Iraq was spent largely outside of the Washington bubble. You know, I can write a lot about policy decisions and policy prescriptions and the implementation of those policies, but in large part, I'd like to talk about the not so great people of history, regular folks like the ones I grew up with. And so I feel like I do have an edge about being able to describe foreign cultures to regular Americans who probably can't pronounce the names and definitely won't ever go to Iraq unless they are serving members of the military. And so two of my major characters, the Iraqis in my book, come from Sadr City. They come from the wrong side of the tracks. They come from a family that lives close to the poverty line. They are, in large part, you know, the story of modern Iraq. And for all of the sins that the U.S. government committed in the aftermath of ousting Saddam Hussein in Iraq, for all of the people whose lives were ruined, there are actually a lot of people's lives who were made better by it. And that's not to say that I'm a great cheerleader for everything the U.S. government has done, but I'm threading throughout my book the story of just these regular Joes, these regular Iraqis whose lives actually were made better, and their opportunities opened up for them after 2003. And the family dynamics that everybody lives in, of course, to a great extent shapes us, either for better or for worse. And so, again, trying to write a book about normal Iraqis, putting them back as main characters in their modern history, instead of telling Iraq's history through the eyes of U.S. military generals or U.S. officers of any sort, I wanted to make the Iraqis the main characters because they're doing some amazing things. Sadr City, of course, is an incredibly large, diverse population, and they make up the bread and butter of Baghdad's workforce. It's only proper that they get a time to shine, and they've done some amazing things behind the scenes.
Tell our viewers and listeners a little bit about the Shia family that is the focus of your story, and were you able to meet the family?
Yeah, so my book, The Spymaster of Baghdad, began as a front page story for the New York Times, and like I said, through this what I thought was a straightforward question that all journalists should have been asking is, how did Baghdad become safe? I got to know about this classified operation that had been underway for 18 months, and the reason why I think I broke through the icy reserve of the Spymaster to tell his story and to tell the story of the Sudani family was because, I'd like to think that I'm very persuasive, and probably I am, but of course, every government official always has a reason for dishing or leaking to a journalist. And in this case, Abu Ali al-Basri had lost a man behind enemy lines, and he wanted to help the family of that fallen officer both get the benefits that they deserved, but also be able to tell the nation and tell the world about this act of bravery. And of course, classification kept him from being able to do that publicly. And so he worked with me behind the scenes in order to write my first story for the New York Times. And through that story, very inadvertently, well, everything I wrote in there was true. Captain Harith Sudani was the undercover officer, and he did some extraordinary things. He also did some kind of stupid things, like many undercover officers through history probably have done. But in large part, I got to know him, his family, his brother, his parents, his wife, the whole extended Sudani family. And because of the way in which the original story in the New York Times was so well received, I had inadvertently created a modern day Iraqi hero. Over 15 years or so, the Iraqis were used to hearing stories about themselves that involved corruption and bloodshed and torture and all of the bad things. But here I was able to tell a story about someone who had worked for, self-sacrificed and worked for the good of his nation. So the Sudani family, after that story was published, they had basically adopted me as one of their own. And in the great tradition of Iraqi and Arab hospitality, I was always a welcome guest. And so I ended up spending months with the Sudanis, again, all levels of the family. And being a woman, I was also very much invited to the more private rooms within the Sudani household, had a lot of conversations with Captain Harith Sudani's mother, with his wife, with all of the sisters and sisters-in-laws. And so part of the, I hope, rich and in-depth portrait that I've been able to write about Iraqi family life and Iraqi society is built off of a lot of meetings with a lot of different people and getting to know people's innermost thoughts, which is it's a very hard thing to do as a journalist, especially I think in the Arab world, that a culture where there isn't a society of self-help books or reality TV and Oprah Winfrey shows. People aren't used to talking about their innermost thoughts. But as a journalist, I was in the right place at the right time. There was a huge trauma that this family had experienced, and they wanted someone to talk to. And as a foreigner, someone who sort of steps into their world but also exists outside of the normal cultural mores, I was able to be that person that they could talk to and tell this amazing tale.
And as I understand it, as a result, they actually got the benefits that they deserved, but had long been denied, in large part because of your efforts.
That's right. Anyone who has served in Iraq knows the infamous, notorious, historic, bureaucratic red tape, right? And so one of the hardships that the Sudani family had experienced, first when they finally found out that their son had died, and some more details about the mission that he was on when he died, they had spent months trying to get the veterans benefits, the martyrs benefits that they should be due as a serving officer of the nation of Iraq. But they didn't have a body to show the probate judge in that part of Baghdad. And without a body, without a death certificate, they were being denied all those benefits. And so the original story in the New York Times, when it published, it went viral in the US, it went viral across Iraq. And all that month of hardship, the months of hardship that they had endured were suddenly, kind of in a blink of an eye, all erased. 6 hours after the story went up on the New York Times website, the Prime Minister's office called me in Baghdad and said, put us in touch with the Sudani family. We have to show their appreciation. And then within 72 hours of all this happening, all the red tape had disappeared, and death certificates had been written, and all the benefits that were due to them were going to the Sudani family. And of course, that's an amazing thing. And these are the kind of stories that I think every journalist, dreams about being able to tell. Not only is it sexy and exciting to talk about espionage and successful espionage operations, but I actually changed a family's life. Living in Sadr City near the poverty line, every single dinar helps. And to be able for them to have that financial, what they were due, right? This financial benefit meant the world to them. And then the esteem that the family had was also extraordinary. They jumped about 23 levels in the socioeconomic and cultural, hierarchy in Sadr City. Captain Harith Sudani's own daughter got to marry sort of 3 or 4 steps up in that cultural hierarchy because the esteem that the family finally had due to her father's sacrifice.
Well, it's an amazing story, and congratulations on your success. Are there any other projects in the works?
Wow. Well, there's always about 10 books I wish I could write and have the time to write. Nonfiction is a time-consuming endeavor. I also, as this is my first book, consider writing a book to be an exquisite form of torture. Every night while I was writing, I'd sort of wake up with nightmarish thoughts. How can I confirm this detail? What document can I find that can bolster this fact? And so, the fact checking and the accuracy takes a whole lot of time. However, with all of my time spent in the wider Middle East, lived a long time in the Gulf, and I have some historic and close relationships with members of the Qatar royal family, and would really like to be able to, at some point, write a biography of them and their modern nation. All of us goes to bookstores and see reams of books written about MBS and Saudi rulers, but the Qataris are sort of overdue, I think, for a little bit of limelight, and that would be something, inshallah, that I could turn around in the next 2 or 3 years as COVID permits.
Margaret, having spent so many years in Iraq covering the situation in Baghdad, now that you've had a chance to step back a little bit, any thoughts on those events?
Well, just in a very personal way, there's Abu Ali al-Basri, the Spymaster in my book. One of the things that made him so extraordinary was the way in which that he survived so much of the bureaucratic struggles that governments in Baghdad have gone through since 2005. And shortly after my book was published, he was actually ousted as the head of his elite unit known as As-Sukur, the Falcons. And that has to do a lot with the politics of personality. Part of what I'm writing about in my book is the rebuilding of intelligence services in Iraq post 2003. The National Intelligence Service that was funded and tentatively rebuilt in large part by the CIA, had made an enormous amount of blunders early on. And within within that, the lack of effectiveness that the National Intelligence Service was showing, Abu Ali al-Basri and his unit sort of rose up in prominence and in esteem throughout the U.S.'s estimation. But that also causes a lot of bad blood. Anyone in large bureaucracies will know that revenge is usually served cold. And so Abu Ali al-Basri was ousted when the now former prime minister of Iraq became prime minister after serving as the head of the National Intelligence Agency for several years. So we're now in a time of transition in Iraq again. There's a struggle to stand up a new government. I fully expect that Abu Ali al-Basri is going to regain his position now, since his nemesis is out of power. And so from very direct ways, Baghdad is Baghdad. It is a very hard task to build any parliamentary democracy. I think even in the Western world, from the UK to Israel, parliamentary consensus building is quite difficult. Iraq is no different in that sense. But again, I'm not an Arabist. I'm an accidental one, if you can call me that. But I have spent a lot of time in lots of different Arab countries. I covered all of the Arab Spring revolutions. And one thing that I can say about Iraq, which makes me very bullish about Iraq, is that after 2003, the entire perception and the entire relationship among the Iraqi people to their government has changed in fundamental ways. Iraq is a faltering democracy some days, but in relationship to other Arab countries is an amazing place. Iraqis actually expect a lot from their elected officials. Iraqis actually feel like, as individuals, they have the power to bring, to vote the bums out of office. And that doesn't mean that the institutions that serve them are strong and effective, but it does mean something. And I find it extraordinary from all the Iraqis I talk to, no matter what ethnic group you hail from, what religion you believe in, and what geographic region you're from. Iraqis have the sensibility that other Arabs don't. And I think that is one of the silver linings of what happened back in 2003.
The name of the book is The Spymaster of Baghdad. It's a fascinating story, very well told. And I want to thank Margaret Coker for a great interview.
Thank you very much.